Give me an hour, and I'll help you master the trumpet. Okay, reality check. I doubt that there's ever been a brass player who feels that they've mastered the instrument. Just when you think like we're doing pretty well, the horn has a surprise in store for us. So all we can do is keep plowing ahead. And if you're on that path, what I'm going to show you in this video will help. And if you're new here, my name is Chase Sanborn, and I'm a jazz trumpet player based in Toronto. The focus of this video is the Brass Tactics 660 routine. This was previously published as a separate book, but it's now included in a newly revised 3rd edition of Brass Tactics. I talked about that in my previous video, and I'll link that in the description. The 660 routine is comprised of a series of relatively short but efficient exercises that cover all the bases of sound production in about an hour. When I started this YouTube channel back in 2019, my initial and only goal was to provide demonstrations of the exercises. I wound up getting hooked, and in the past 7 years I've published hundreds of videos on brass playing, jazz improvisation, jazz history, and other topics related to playing and teaching music. The 660 videos that kicked off the channel were released as separate episodes, each focused on a specific exercise. In this one, I've combined all the episodes, and I've done a fair bit of editing to make them more clear and concise. It's still a pretty lengthy video, though, and I'll put timestamps in the description. In the book, all the exercises are presented in 3 levels for players ranging from intermediate to advanced, although some of them can be adapted for early-stage learners. The demonstrations in this video mostly focus on level 3, which is the most advanced. And while the bias is towards the trumpet, the concepts are applicable to any brass player. Obviously, you'll get the most out of this if you have the book as well, and you can get a signed copy at my website. Because I don't do memberships or paid courses or put my content behind a paywall, book sales and other products help support the channel, along with folks who come to me for online lessons. And you can find out more at chasesanborn.com. To keep us anchored in the present, I'll introduce each segment, and then I'll turn you over to Chase from about 5 years ago to discuss and demonstrate each exercise. In the first segment, I provide an overview of the 660 routine, including the evolution, design goals, and application. After that, I'll be back to introduce the next segment. I think it was Bach who said that with the piano, all you have to do is to push the right key at the right time, and the instrument plays itself. Well, we can only wish that it were so for us. My goal in creating the Brass Tactics 660 routine was to create a series of exercises that would address all aspects of sound production in the most efficient way possible. The starting point was to make a list of everything that I hope to practice on a regular basis relating to sound production. That includes long notes, short notes, high notes, low notes, loud notes, soft notes, slurred notes, articulated notes, scales, arpeggios, finger dexterity, leadpipe buzzing, mouthpiece buzzing, flexibilities, long tones, note bending, intonation, initial attacks, single, double, and triple tonguing, tone quality, endurance, and range. Now that's quite a list, but an accomplished brass player needs all of those things. In setting out to design the routine, which I did over a 2-year period working with myself and my students, I had a couple of goals in mind. I wanted each exercise to be relatively short, and I wanted the whole routine to take no more than an hour. In the end, I wound up with 8 exercises, each of which addresses multiple items on the list. No exercise takes longer than 6 minutes if it's played at the marked tempo, and the total time, including rest, is about an hour. Thus the title. So now we're ready to dig into the 8 exercises that comprise the 660 routine. The first demonstration video is about pedal tones. This is described in the book as a preparatory exercise because pedal tones appear in most of the exercises, mostly as a way to relax and revitalize the chops. I discuss how and why pedal tones should be played and the value that can be derived from including them in a practice routine. Although this is a video about pedal tones, I started with a relatively high note because no self-respecting trumpet player is going to watch a video that's only about low notes, am I right? Now, pedal tones are not actually one of the 8 exercises that comprise the routine, but they do appear in many of the exercises, so we'll go ahead and start at the bottom, and I promise that there will be more high notes in other episodes. Pedal tones are notes that lie below the normal playing range of the instrument. The reason for including them in this routine is twofold. One, they extend your low register beyond the bounds of the lowest note that you'll need to perform, and that same philosophy holds true for high notes. 2, they relax and revive your chops, helping to keep them supple and responsive. Since pedal tones are basically an extension of the normal low register, the first step is to produce a robust sound all the way down to the lowest note on the horn, which is F sharp or concert E on a B flat trumpet. Although this note shows up in the range charts as the lowest note on the trumpet, it's not the lowest frequency that your lips can vibrate, as any tuba player can attest. Here, I'll bend the pitch down from F sharp to F, which is the first pedal tone. And this is pretty easy to do. Now from that point, I can keep bending down in half steps while keeping all three valves down. It's somewhat imprecise because there are no real slots for these notes. If I finger the pedal tones like an octave above, then it's easier to pitch them accurately. Some people will find that when you're changing valves between low F sharp and pedal F, the altered air passage may cause you to lose lip vibration. In that case, try bending down the pitch first and then change valves. It'll take a little practice, but when you can do that, try coming in directly on the pedal notes. First playing the note an octave above to get the pitch, and then play the pedal tone with the same fingering an octave below. The next note in the chromatic scale is the somewhat infamous pedal C, which is similar to double C in that it's hard to play and has limited musical application. Pedal C is the fundamental pitch of the overtone series on which the trumpet is based, so it should be an octave below low C. But it naturally comes out quite flat, actually closer to a B flat. So to play pedal C with open fingering, you have to pull the B flat pitch up. Now, to give you an idea of how the pedal tones appear most often in the 660 routine, I'm going to add an octave below pedal C to double pedal C. And then I'm going to continue down in half steps until I reach double pedal E. Now, that's about the lowest pitch that I can typically produce, although on good days I can sometimes make it to a D. As you watch this demonstration, here's a few things to note. I finger the pedal tones down to the first pedal C sharp, the same as an octave above. But from pedal C on down, I play all notes with open fingering. Now, you can really play these notes with any fingering, but this is what I find to be the easiest. For the first octave of pedals, you'll see that I have a noticeable pivot and embouchure adjustment. For the second octave, the mouthpiece actually moves up on my lips to the point that it ultimately winds up almost entirely on my top lip. Most of the time, I'm using pedal tones just as a way to relax my lips at the end of a line before I rest, so I'm not concerned with the mouthpiece shifting and then trying to get back to a normal playing position. Now, there's an exception in one of the exercises, and I'll get to that in a couple of episodes, but basically, I'm just trying to do whatever I need to do to get the lips to vibrate down in that register. The next segment is about lead pipe buzzing, which is the first actual exercise in the routine. I talk about why I find it so beneficial as a way to start off the practice session and the difference between producing notes on a lead pipe as opposed to the mouthpiece or the horn. Lead pipe buzzing is the first exercise in the 660 routine, and it's usually the first thing that I play in the day. The technique is most often associated with the great brass teacher Bill Adam, and it was an Adam student who first showed it to me. Now, that was several decades ago, and since then it's been my go-to start of the practice session because it's an excellent way to quickly get the lips vibrating in all registers. Most people will access the lead pipe by removing the tuning slide from the trumpet. I like using a separate lead pipe because it's convenient, and also because holding the pipe in my fingers inspires a very light touch, which is something that I'm definitely looking for at the start of a practice session. The lead pipe has slots or nodal points just like the trumpet does, certain pitches at which the pipe resonates most freely. In B-flat pitch, the slots are approximately first space F, pedal F, G on top of the staff, high D, and high G. On a good day, I can also find a slot for a double B. Now, I say these pitches are approximate because the slots on the lead pipe are not as defined as they are on the trumpet, and the exact pitch will vary somewhat depending on the lead pipe and the mouthpiece. The goal is to find the place where the note is the most resonant, so the focus is more on tone quality and the intensity of the sound than it is on a specific pitch. For the lead pipe exercise in the 660 routine, I play these 5 pitches in a certain order, and I apply a sequence of articulations to each pitch that consists of breath attacks, tongue attacks, staccato notes, sustained notes, slurs, and glisses. In level 1 of the routine, you play the bottom 3 notes. Level 2 adds the high D, and level 3 adds the high G. Now, people sometimes find that they can play a note on the lead pipe that they can't yet play on the horn. And I think it is somewhat easier on the lead pipe, but if the pitch comes out, that means your lips are vibrating at the right frequency, and that's a step in the right direction, both physically and mentally. I'm going to demonstrate the pattern on each of the 5 notes, and as I do, here's a few things to note. On this and on all the demonstrations in this series, I'll edit out the rests and repeats to shorten the viewing time. The lead pipe exercise takes about 6 minutes to perform, and the mouthpiece is off the chops about as much as it is on during that time. The volume should be comfortably moderate. Not too soft, but definitely not too loud. This is especially true on the higher notes. We're trying to unlock the key to efficient playing by coaxing the lips into vibration, not by forcing them into submission. As I play the 5 notes, you'll see the pipe move up and down in various registers. This is known as the pivot, and it helps keep the vibrating points aligned with the airstream. Most people have a natural pivot that relates to your teeth and your jaw structure. For me, I pivot up for the lower register and down for the higher register. On each of the demonstrations in this series, I'll indicate which mouthpiece I'm playing. For this one, it's the CS66MS. Now, this is the middle cup volume in a matched set of 3 that includes the CS66S and the CS66M. The CS mouthpieces were designed in consultation with and they're manufactured by GR Mouthpiece Technologies. And if you want to know more about them, you can watch this video and I'll link to it in the description. The next segment is on mouthpiece buzzing. I talk about why the term buzzing is a misnomer and the benefits that accrue from mouthpiece practice, which, as I'll explain, may be particularly applicable if your name is Jim. If you've spent any amount of time exploring brass pedagogy, you may have noticed that what one person recommends, another may recommend against. Now that's true for mouthpiece buzzing, although I do think that the consensus overall tends to be more positive than negative. In any case, 3 teachers who come to mind as strongly in favor of mouthpiece buzzing are James Stamp, Jim Thompson, and Jimmy Maxwell. So I guess maybe we could say that mouthpiece buzzing is a good idea if your name is Jim. Or Chase, I guess. Let me start by addressing the term buzzing. If you're buzzing your lips alone, that's a pretty accurate description of the sound. Free lip buzzing requires quite a bit of embouchure compression, especially because you don't have a rim to isolate the vibrating points. As you connect various bits of tubing to your lips, you actually have to release some of that embouchure compression to get the most resonant sound. If you try to play the horn or even the mouthpiece with the same amount of compression that it takes to buzz your lips alone, the sound is going to be very choked or tight. Your lips do vibrate when you play the mouthpiece, but they don't really buzz. And I think that could give people the wrong impression about how much embouchure compression is actually needed. But the term buzzing is generally accepted, so I'm not going to swim against the tide. To me, the principal benefits of mouthpiece buzzing relate to tone quality and pitch accuracy. If there are flaws in the lip vibration, you'll hear it on the mouthpiece. If you approach this exercise with a critical ear, it can be pretty frustrating or even disheartening to hear your flaws revealed so clearly. But the quickest and the surest path to improvement is to reveal your flaws so that you can take steps to address them. Pitch accuracy comes with the fact that the mouthpiece has no mechanical means like valves or a slide to delineate one note from another. We're very much like vocalists in this situation in that the only way to produce a given pitch is to hear it first. As the mouthpiece routine moves up in half steps, unless you have perfect pitch, you'll probably need some kind of reference or starting pitch to stay on track. I use drones that I made up for my tuning tactics book, and they consist of a pure-tuned root, fifth, and root above. Generally, I listen to the drone first, and I match my upper and lower pitches to it. Then I turn off the drone while I play the line in the exercise. When I finish, I turn the drone on again to see whether my pitch is drifted. That makes this an ear training exercise as well, and it helps to connect the physical sensation of playing a note with the sound of it. The buzzing exercise, as it appears in the 660 routine, consists of descending major scales, followed by an ascending gliss from the bottom note back up to the top. Depending on the level, the scales and the glisses can be 1 or 2 octaves. The exercise ascends in half steps as high as you can comfortably buzz. Typically that'll be somewhat lower than you can play on the horn, but it likely represents the range that you solidly own on the horn. I'm going to demonstrate in 3 keys, which will have me covering an overall range of 2.5 octaves. Here are a few things to note as you watch the demonstration. I used the separate lead pipe for this exercise that I used in the lead pipe exercise, but with a buzz aid inserted. The buzz aid diverts air out the side of it rather than into the pipe, so that it essentially turns the horn, or in this case the lead pipe, into a holder for the mouthpiece. That helps keep you in a more normal playing position. While I strive to be reasonably accurate with the pitch, my main priority is that the top note should feel the same whether I start on it or end on it. I play this exercise on the CS66M mouthpiece, which is the largest of my 3 cups. That makes it harder in the upper register, which forces me to pay close attention to the balance of lip and air compression. The next exercise consists of major and minor arpeggios which connect the lip vibrations to the natural physics of the horn. I delve briefly into the overtone series and the importance of aligning the vibration of the lips with the natural frequencies of the pipe in search of a resonant and centered tone. Arpeggios is the third exercise in the 660 routine. Having established lip vibration on the lead pipe and the mouthpiece in the previous two exercises, this one brings the horn into the equation. Now that comes with advantages, but also challenges, because the laws of physics have greater bearing when a vibrating pipe is measured in feet rather than inches. If you were to unravel a B-flat trumpet, you'd wind up with a pipe that is just over 4 feet long. It gets progressively longer as you depress the valves because that channels the air through additional tubing. 7 valve combinations mirror the 7 positions on a trombone slide, but because it's less visual, I find that some students are unaware of what actually happens when they push a valve down. So let's start with a brief physics lesson. A pipe of a given length, as determined by the valve combination or the slide position, has natural frequencies of vibration that correlate to the overtone series. When you lower the pitch of the instrument by depressing valves or extending a trombone slide, all of those natural frequencies or partials descend by the same amount. When we put together 7 of these overtone series in adjacent half steps, we wind up with every note of the chromatic scale, and also numerous overlaps where the same note can be played with different fingerings. Now these alternate or false fingerings have small variances in pitch because they're mathematically derived from a different fundamental pitch. To produce a desired note, and beyond that a resonant tone quality, the vibrations of the lips must align with one of the nodal frequencies of the pipe. The Arpeggios exercise, and really all the ones that follow, are all about adjusting the functions of the body so that it works with rather than against the immutable characteristics of a vibrating pipe. Variation 1 of this exercise uses ascending slurred major triads beginning on a low C. Subsequent starting notes descend in half steps until you reach pedal C sharp. As I talked about in episode 2, pedal tones appear in many of the exercises in the 660 routine at the end of a line to relax the chops. In this one, they're treated as part of the line, which effectively lowers the working range of the trumpet a perfect fourth from low F sharp to pedal C sharp. Each arpeggio ascends up to, but generally not beyond, the top note in the first line. For example, in level 3, you start with a 2-octave arpeggio that ascends from low C to high C. That arpeggio is lowered by half steps until you reach the key of F, which starts on a pedal F, and then the high C is added to the top of the arpeggio. In this way, they not only become progressively lower, but they get longer as well. Variation 2 begins with an octave slur, which is followed by a slurred minor triad up and down. On this one, the starting notes go up in half steps, as high as you can go, but with complete control and at moderate volume. Beginning this exercise with an octave slur is based on what I call the springboard principle. The idea is that to set yourself up for the large interval, you lay into the bottom note the way a diver depresses the board on the last step. You establish airflow on the lower note, and you let that carry you up to the upper note. Now, to be sure, the embouchure and the tongue level are involved in executing any interval, especially a large interval, and the coordination is crucial. But in general, the more you keep your focus on the airstream, the better. If I get a good clean octave slur to start, then my chops feel really well set up for the triad that follows. To demonstrate variation 1, I'll begin with a 1-octave arpeggio up to high D-flat. I'll then lower the starting notes to each note of a D-flat triad, always going back up to the same high D-flat. Eventually I'll get down to pedal D-flat as a starting note, which will give me a 3-octave arpeggio. Now the goal is to feel and sound the same on the top D-flat, regardless of the starting note, but the further away you start, the more challenging that becomes. For variation 2, consisting of octave slurs and minor triads, I'll demonstrate in the keys of C minor, F minor, and B flat minor. That'll have me covering a range of about 2.5 octaves from low C to high F. Here's a few things to note as you watch the demonstrations. On both variations, I try to keep the volume to about mezzo forte or less. I'm trying to find the right balance of air and lip compression for each note without resorting to any extra force or pressure. I think it was Philip Farkas who described this as knowing the combination to a safe. If you do, you can open it with 2 fingers. When the line starts from a note in the pedal register, you want to make sure that you fully utilize the slot for the notes above it in the normal low register. I describe this as falling upwards into the slot. At all times when I'm playing this routine, I make a conscious effort to reduce external embouchure movement. This happens right from the setup of the first note. I try to have everything in place, fingers, lips, and air, so that the only moving part at the moment of attack is my tongue. At the end of a line, I hold the embouchure in place until the air and the sound have stopped entirely. You might think about an orchestra conductor who keeps the baton up until the sound has finished reverberating throughout the hall. These are the kinds of conscious physical actions that we do when we're playing exercises so that they become habits when our minds are focused on playing music. For this exercise, I use the CS66M mouthpiece because the tone quality of the larger cup is most in line with what I'm trying to produce. Flexibility exercises are ubiquitous for brass players. Being able to move freely between the partials is an essential aspect of working with the physics of the instrument rather than fighting it. And this exercise is great for expanding range in both directions, up and down. I discuss the use of the tongue arch as a way to help control airspeed, which has an impact on range. One of the greatest trumpet players that I've ever known describes his phenomenal ability as simply getting from the center of one note to the center of the next note. Now, there are, of course, many factors in being able to play on the highest level, but it does, in the end, come down to getting from one note to the next. While flexibility is a factor, whether you're tonguing or you're slurring, what we typically think of as flexibility exercises are slurred between adjacent partials with the same fingering. When there's no change of valve involved, the focus is on the other physical elements that determine pitch, namely air compression, embouchure compression, and tongue level. The tongue serves two primary functions in brass playing. It creates a controlled burst of air for a tongue attack, and it impacts the airspeed on a slur or a sustained note. It does this by forming an arch over which the air flows. When the tongue arch is down, as it would be when whispering the syllable ah or ah, your oral cavity is larger, and the air typically slows down as a result. As the tongue arch rises up, as it does when saying the syllables oo, e, and ich, the airstream becomes compressed and the air speeds up. So in general terms, we can say that lower tongue levels are for low notes and higher tongue levels are for high notes. But these are relative terms, depending on the individual's ability and what it is you're trying to play. For example, if you're going to slur a large interval, then it may help to have a dramatic change of tongue arch level, like from ah to e, ah, because that helps you to quickly change the airspeed. Now, that might leave you with a higher tongue level on the upper note than you might otherwise have, and in that situation, after the slur, your tongue level might come back down to bring out the resonance in the note. Now, I will say that I've known really good brass players who don't feel that they changed their tongue arch level. We'd need a way to see inside their mouth to know for sure, and some studies have been done, but for me, it's an important part of controlling the airspeed and therefore range. Variation 1 is what I'd call a pretty typical flexibility that starts in the mid-register and it moves progressively in both directions, performed on all 7 valve combinations. I do like to include the third in the bottom octave, which requires a change of valves, but otherwise all the notes in each line are played with the same valve combination. Variation 2 starts on a low F sharp with a 1-octave slur up through the partials, again including the third, and then it adds additional partials on top with a varying rhythmic pattern. The last stage of both variations is the same. It's basically a continuation of variation 2. In level 3, that winds up with a rapid 2.5 octave ascent through all the partials from low C to high G that is in effect a controlled rip. For the demonstration, I'll play variations 1 and 2 in the keys of F sharp, which is all the 1, 2, 3 partials, and C, which is all the open partials. This pattern will take me from low F sharp to high C. From there, I'll play the exercise as it appears in both variations, with ending notes that ascend chromatically from high C sharp to high G. If I'm feeling ambitious, I sometimes try to push that to G sharp and A. Here's a few things to note as you watch the demonstration. The metronome is clicking at a pulse of 60, as it is for all the exercises in the 660 routine, but I'm hearing the pulses as offbeats. This creates the sense of a faster pulse within a slower metronome setting. In the low and mid registers, I keep the volume pretty moderate. As I ascend, the volume naturally increases with the increased airspeed. If you can picture a party favor that unrolls as you blow, imagine it unfurling from your bell as the lines ascend. This illustrates the concept that high notes are not further up, they're further out. I used the CS66MS mouthpiece for this one. The middle-sized cup facilitates traversing a wide range. Long tones are undeniably beneficial for the brass player, but boredom is a disincentive. So in the next exercise, I combine long tones with note bending, which is another underutilized technique for many players. In this, I adhere to one of the design goals of the 660 routine, which is to cover multiple bases within a single exercise. Long tones are like vegetables. Some people enjoy them and others are more ambivalent, but we eat them because we know they're good for us. Now, I'm in the latter category on vegetables, and I've always felt somewhat the same about long tones on the trumpet. My strategy on vegetables has been to find ways to make them taste better so that I'm more likely to eat them. My strategy on long tones is to find a way to make them less boring so I'm more likely to play them. Now, I know that I'm not alone in not being a fan of long tones, although I will say that I like them better now than I used to. They let you really hone in on the consistency of your airstream and the purity of your lip vibrations. That's why they're considered beneficial in the development of your tone quality. Without the right mindset, though, playing a bunch of long, single, sustained notes can seem boring. And if you feel bored by what you're doing, you're not going to get the most out of it, and you're disincentivized to do it. For these reasons, and one other, I like to begin the long tone with a note bend. Note bending is sometimes called lip bending. To me, that's a misnomer because it has more to do with the air and the tongue level than it does the lips. The principle behind note bending is that you force the horn away from one of its natural partials. At that point, you're fighting the instrument. When you let the pitch return, you're following the path of least resistance. That helps you find the center of the pitch where the note is the most stable, and that's the other reason I like to combine long tones with note bending. Variation 1 of this exercise uses what I call traditional note bending, where the pitch of a note is lowered or bent down without changing valves. In Variation 2, which I call reverse note bending, you try to hold the pitch steady while you change to a valve combination for the note that's a half step above. I first came across this technique in a book by Mick Hess called Perfecting Your Practice for Peak Performance, and that's a lot of P's. Mick calls it ascending bending, and he incorporates the bends into flexibility-style exercises. I came across it again in John Daniel's book called Special Studies for Trumpet. Now, John takes the concept further, for example, playing entire scales with the fingering of a half step above. Now, I did try that, but I felt too bad for anyone who was within earshot. For the demonstration, I'll play both traditional and reverse note bends on notes that are ranging from low F sharp to high F. On the top note, I actually dispense with the note bend and just try to hold the note steady. That's still pretty challenging in the high register, and I find that trying to bend a note when the partials are so close together is more frustrating than effective. Here's a few things to note as you watch the demonstration. The most important part of this exercise is not the note bend, but the long tone that follows the bend. You could say that the purpose of the note bend is to set you up for the long tone. This is also an exercise where I pay extra close attention to the start of each note. Getting a clean, well-defined initial attack is a problem for a lot of players because you're bringing the lips from a state of inactivity to almost instantaneous vibration. That takes well-coordinated physical action in response to a clear command from the brain. The volume on this one should be no louder than it needs to be to produce a clean attack and stable tone quality. The length of the long tone could be anywhere from a whole note to the end of your breath, but long enough to analyze what you're hearing and feeling and how those two things relate. On Variation 1, if you find yourself slipping off the note when you try to bend it down, don't try to go a whole half step. Just give a little tug on the note and then let it go back. The higher you go, the harder it gets to bend notes. On Variation 2, if you lose hold of the note when you change valves, then let the pitch naturally go up a half step with the valve change and then bend it down to the original pitch. From there, try to hold it steady while you change back to the original valve combination. On either variation, you may find, as I do, that at a certain point in your range, it makes more sense to just hold the note without trying for the note bend. I use the CS66M mouthpiece for the bending exercise. In the high register, the larger cup makes me work harder to maintain lip compression, but that helps build strength in the embouchure corners. As in the other demos, I'll edit out the rests, and I'll also play the long tone a little shorter than I would normally. The next exercise is called velocity, and it's a scale study based on Herbert L. Clark's technical studies. The focus is on clean and crisp finger technique and a steady supportive airstream. While the goal is to increase the speed, as the name suggests, as in all the exercises of the 660 routine, accuracy is far more important than speed. It may or may not have been Picasso who coined the phrase, "good artists copy, great ones steal." But in the composition of this exercise, I have admittedly stolen from one of the greats. The sixth exercise in the 660 routine is called velocity, and it's based on, or if you prefer, stolen from the fifth study in Herbert L. Clark's characteristic studies. Now, this book is more than 100 years old, but it can still be found on most serious trumpet players' shelves. For the 660 routine, I've treated the first half of Clark's study as Variation 1 and the second half as Variation 2. I then adapted and simplified those two variations to create levels 1 and 2, which act like stepping stones that get you to the full study in level 3. As the name implies, the velocity exercise is intended to be played reasonably fast. Now that requires crisp and accurate fingers for a starting point, so a lot of attention needs to be focused on that. Beyond that, the airstream needs to be focused and directed as it's rapidly channeled through varying lengths of tubing. And the tongue level moves up and down as the lines rise and fall, which impacts the speed of the airstream. And finally, the lips need to be continually compressing and decompressing as the line moves up and down. Now that's a lot of physical actions to take into account, although realistically, all of those things are happening for almost everything you play. The coordination between air, tongue, lips, and fingers determines whether playing feels hard or easy. If you get it right, the notes pop out of the horn in the same way that a baseball rockets off the baseball bat if it's hit just right. For the demonstration, I'm going to play both variations in the keys of G, C, and F. Those three keys will have me covering a range of almost 3 octaves. Here's a few things to note as you watch the demonstration. It's a good idea to finger each line before you play it. That provides extra workout time for the fingers and it keeps your brain active while you're resting. Although the exercise is slurred, you can also lightly tongue while you're fingering, which brings in that component as well. The higher you go on a brass instrument, the closer the partials get together, and therefore the greater the chance that you'll overshoot or undershoot a note. If that's happening, then slow down and try to get them all. Accuracy will always trump speed. As in the flexibility exercise, I hear the metronome is clicking on offbeats for this one. The key to playing accurately with a metronome is to pay special attention to the notes that coincide with the metronome clicks, whether those are on the downbeat or the offbeat. For the demonstration, I'm going to use the CS66M mouthpiece. When I'm playing the routine, I'm just as likely to choose the CS66MS. The slightly smaller cup would make it a little easier to produce the notes in the upper register, and it would sound a little less resonant in the lower register. When I'm practicing, I often default to the mouthpiece that makes me work a little harder in the upper register. On the gig, I'll use whatever mouthpiece makes my job easier. The next exercise focuses on single, double, and triple tonguing. I talk about the benefits of practicing multiple tonguing even if your playing style doesn't require it, because it puts the tongue through its paces and it requires precise coordination with the fingers. I also point out a connection between tonguing and the high register, and if that doesn't give you the incentive, nothing will. In a memorable moment of candor, a student once said to me, "I don't like to practice double tonguing because I'm not very good at it." Now, no sooner were the words out of her mouth than she put up her hands and said, I know. Single tonguing uses the tip of the tongue as with the syllables T and D. Double and triple tonguing, which we also call multiple tonguing, incorporates strokes from the back of the tongue as with the syllables K or a hard G like G. Alternating the two kinds of syllables, or allows us to articulate much faster than we can with the tip of the tongue alone. Now, I will say that in my career as a jazz or a commercial trumpet player, it's been exceedingly rare that I ever needed to use any significant amount of double or triple tonguing. We might need to spit out a couple of notes like in a fanfare, but in terms of performing cornet-style multiple tonguing, I can only think of one time in my life that I was hired to do that for a record date. And I was glad that I was able to pull it off, even if no one would mistake me for a real expert at it. Even though it's a skill that I rarely need in performance, multiple tonguing has always been a part of my practice routine, and I do include it in the 660 routine.
I do it because it's a valuable part of training the tongue. So whether I'm trying to articulate a line in a big band chart or play a solo transcription from somebody like Clark Terry or Clifford Brown, the more proficient that my tongue is, the better I'm able to do that. Now, Wynton Marsalis is the perfect example. As a young man who earned Grammy Awards in both classical and jazz categories, he demonstrated his fluency with multiple tonguing, and he even used the technique in some of his earliest jazz recordings. As his career progressed and he focused exclusively on jazz, well, we don't hear much of that anymore from him. But if you listen to him playing up-tempo jazz lines, his articulation is impeccable, as is pretty much everything else about his playing. I mentioned that tonguing is not the only focus of this exercise. I've always perceived a connection between tonguing and high notes, in that both require a very firm and stable embouchure in combination with a compressed airstream. After an extended tonguing exercise, I feel the burn in the mouth corners that should also bear the brunt of high note playing. Because the tonguing exercise takes you all the way into your upper register with a certain amount of power, it could be considered a range exercise as well. Variation 1 of the tonguing exercise combines double tonguing with single tonguing. Variation 2 combines triple tonguing with single tonguing. I'm going to demonstrate both in 3 keys, which will take me from a low G to a high G. Here's a few things to note as you watch the demonstration. My goal is to land in the dead center of each note, like hitting a nail on the head. If you get it just right, they pop out of the horn. The airstream has to be focused and steady, as if you're playing a single sustained note. The more assertive the air, the less the tongue has to move to release a measured burst. I think of the notes as riding on the stream of air like ping pong balls floating on a stream of water. Although I'm playing the exercise fairly fast, which is when you typically use multiple tonguing, when you're learning the technique, you've got to do it slow so that you can hear the comparison between the 2 syllables. It's very hard to make them match exactly, but that is the goal. The fingers have to move fast and in precise coordination with the tongue. Oftentimes, the tongue is blamed for what is actually poor coordination with the fingers. But if the valves are not in the correct position at the exact moment of the attack, then the tongue stands very little chance of producing a clear articulation. For the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to use 2 different mouthpieces, the CS66M for the multiple tonguing sections and the CS66S for the single tonguing sections, which also go into the upper register. Now, these 2 mouthpieces are on opposite ends of a 3 mouthpiece range for me. It's possible that you won't hear much difference, and that's actually a good thing. But you should know that each mouthpiece makes it easier to do what I'm attempting to do, whether that's multiple tonguing in the low register or popping out notes in the high register. Of course, in an actual performance situation, I'm not going to change mouthpieces in the middle of a line, but most musical situations don't involve extremes like this exercise does, thankfully.
This video is the last one in this series, but there are more to come. If you've made it this far, you've proven yourself to be dedicated to the ancient art of blowing into a brass tube in the hopes that music will emerge from the other end. You'll see a couple of suggestions for other videos at the top of your screen, and you can find all my videos sorted into playlists on the channel. Please make sure you leave a like on this video and consider subscribing. I read and respond to every comment, and I love the sense of community that's grown in the 7 years that I've been doing this, so join the conversation.